So a study was done about what separated the top 5 tennis players of the world from the top 25. What is the difference? And when they talked to all these athletes and studied them, they found out the difference was that the top 5 had a skill of being able to think positively throughout a tennis game, even when things were tough. That they could filter out what might be going wrong or what they construed as something going wrong and bring up a positive thought. So if they made an unforced error or they couldn't return a shot or something like that, they could think that I love this game. I love playing this game. I love having the opportunity. I'm going to win the next point or something like this, or this tournament is mine. Something that they had within their mindset that separated them from the others, from the pack. And so when I found this reading about and chose the word discrimination, I think that's important for us to delve into, because most of our day is to decide what thoughts we're going to hold on to and how are we going to move forward with those thoughts. So when we think of discrimination, I think we think really about, again, the inner density, the intense density of this time in life when all we think about is discrimination, is racial discrimination. But discrimination really just means to be able to make a decision, to divide what something is and decide what you think about one thing as opposed to something else. The etymology of the word really is to separate. And the word crime actually comes from the same thing, to decide, to separate. And so if you can separate, as they say, the wheat from the chaff and decide what you want to keep and what you're going to give away, what you're going to let go of, then you can be in a much stronger position. They say somebody has discriminating taste when they know what is tasteful as opposed to what is not tasteful, in their humble opinion. And so we go through our day, often without thinking, discriminating about what is filtering in and what are we going to hone on to. And sometimes that decision is being made by our subconscious mind because of our stuff, the things we've been through, our life, our early years, our training, maybe the job that we had. I know the jobs that I've had have very much influenced how I move through the world. And so sometimes those decisions are made in a hair of a second in our subconscious minds, and we don't even know what's happening. And then we find ourselves, we're running with a thought. And sometimes I stop and think, because I try to be highly aware of what's going on in my head and in my heart, because I know that is going to influence my behavior. I'm aware, even if I don't quite like what I'm thinking in the moment, I'm thinking about why I'm thinking it. Where'd that come from? Why am I running with that line of thought as opposed to something else? So just like a tennis athlete, if I missed a point or I'm down by several points and I'm already thinking I've lost the game, why am I there? Rather than thinking, oh, I can come back from this. I've done it before. I know how to do this. I know who I'm playing. I know what their game is. I just need to figure this out. And the next moment is a new moment. And the past moment means nothing to this moment. So now I can create something different if I want. The past doesn't have to affect this present moment. And sometimes I lose that because I'm still dragging to the present. What happened 5 minutes ago, 5 weeks ago, 5 months ago, 5 years ago, 5 decades ago. So as we discriminate through our day, through our lives, think it's important for us to remember that we can build up a skill of thinking positively. And we've talked about this before because the brain automatically goes to the negative. The brain automatically goes into protection mode because that's its job. That's why it was created, to keep you safe. But safe is not always our highest and best. Safe doesn't always mean not dangerous. It might mean just being comfortable and being where you are because you're used to being there. You're laying in a rut, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically. Sometimes we're just in a rut and we're used to doing that, so we just turn around in this ditch over and over and over again in the old habits of thought. Because we have habits of behavior, but we have habits of thought. We have habits of thought. And so as I work to break my habits of thought, I lean on spirit. And what my go-to has been lately is that all that God is, I am. I am made in the image and likeness of the divine. And all that God is, I am. I am not all that God is, but all that God is, I am. All that God is, I am. Last Tuesday in our internet TV show, PJ and I, Reverend Dr. PJ Stanley from Harmony Spiritual Center in Fort Worth and I were talking about healing. And one of the things we were talking about was Myrtle Fillmore. And that she kept that thought that as a child of God, I do not inherit sickness. She kept that one thought, and used that thought and that realization to heal herself of tuberculosis at a time when a lot of people died from tuberculosis. She hung on to one thought. Even when she didn't feel well. I didn't know this, but when she first went to that talk where she heard that said, the doctors had given up on her. And they said, look, there's nothing else we can do for you. So that was like a last-ditch effort for her and Charles, her husband. Interesting that she was sick, but the last-ditch effort was, I'm gonna go sit in a talk somebody's given and see what they have to say, and that's where she heard it. And I would imagine there was a number of thoughts that came through her head because she probably felt terrible. I don't know what it's like to have tuberculosis. But if the doctors have said, I'm sorry, but there's nothing else we can do, I imagine she didn't feel good at all. And maybe the last thing her body wanted to do was to sit in somebody's lecture and hear them talk. And yet she went. So the fact that she said yes to that was a discriminating thought. Because I'm sure there's part of her that said, just stay home and be in bed. So she went and she heard that. And that one thing she needed to hear to heal herself was what she hung on to, was what made the difference for her. All of a sudden, a switch flipped for her. And that one thought, she let go of all the other stuff that she had been told all her life about being sickly. All of that she gave up. And when it got hard again, that's what she said to herself. As a child of God, I do not inherit sickness. So for me, it's now all that God is, I am. And when it gets tough again, I go back to all that God is, I am. My body is, my heart is, my mind is, my spirit is God. And I just let that soak in. I love Matthew Kelly's, that section in his book where he says, really, God's answers are always simple. They always have been for me. And I think now that truth truly is simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's not hard. There's not a lot of sentences. There's not a lot to figure out. You don't have to go look it up in the dictionary. You don't have to sit and ponder about it for years and years and years. It's just simple. And we just need to get to the point where we accept the simple answer and run with that. And let go of all that other stuff. Use that discriminating mind that we have and let go of all the chaff and take the wheat. Take the good stuff. Even if the bad stuff seems to be piling up. And sometimes it's piling up, isn't it? Sometimes it's piling up. So can we discriminate all the billions and billions of thoughts that come into our heads at any given time? Or the 5 or 6 persistent ones that roam around our heads all the time about who and what we are and what we're capable of or not capable of? And can we just make up something good? I forget who it was, somebody else I was reading from. He said, we're making up stuff all the time anyway. Just make something good up this time. They're all stories. All the stuff you said about how it wouldn't work or how you can't have or how you don't deserve, all that's made up. Or the person who said it to you made it up. So let's change it up and get a different story. Run with that story. And run with it until it manifests in your life. It's been a long time, but when I would read my horoscope, if I didn't like the horoscope for the day, I would throw it out and say, I'm not doing that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not affirming that. But if I liked the horoscope where I would read somebody else's and say, I'm taking that one today. I might be a Virgo, but I like Aries' message today. It's in there somewhere. That's right. And I just take that one. I don't care. Or I get a fortune cookie and think, what? Must be somebody else's cookie. We get to choose. And I think we forget that. We get between a rock and a hard place, and all you see is the rock and the hard place. And all you feel is a stone up against your back or up against your heart or up against your mind. And we just give up, and we're just laying between the rock and the hard place thinking, oh gosh, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it anymore. I'm just going to surrender to the ugly story, to the scary story. Why? We don't have to. We don't have to. I like that we get to choose. I think choice is maybe our greatest gift next to clarity. Next to clarity. It's good to be clear. I like being clear. Even if I don't like what's happening, I like being clear either about what is happening or that it's happening to me or that it's mine to take care of or whatever it is. I love being clear because then when you're clear, you can truly discriminate. You can truly say, I'm deciding this, not that. If I'm clear about what's happening about who is in front of me and what I need to do now with that relationship, then I know what to do. Even if it's painful to do. In fact, especially if it's painful to do. It's nice to be clear that that's what you got to do. We may not like the answer. We may not like the solution. It doesn't mean that it won't work. It just means there's another part of us that's still struggling with it, is in conflict. Or it thinks the answer should not be simple. Or we just hear the answer from spirit or somewhere from within ourselves, and we say, just like with the horoscope, I don't like that answer because it's going to require too much of me. Or I've never been that before in the world. Or I've never said that to that person. I've never stood in my power with that person. So I'm just going to contract or stick my head in the sand or put my blinders on or just pretend it didn't happen. When something is calling you out and saying, I got something better for you, and we can do that. We can do that. In Philippians 4:8, that's a scripture that says whatever is true, whatever is lovely, whatever is noble, whatever is excellent, think on those things. And the peace of God will be with you. Peace of God will be with you. Yesterday we were watching the movie Creation about Charles Darwin and when he was writing Origin of the Species. And he had a hard time writing that book because so many people, he and others who were guiding him through this process or watching him through this process, other scientists, thought that the conclusions he was coming up with denied the presence of God. So he didn't want to write that book. It took him years to write it. And he was sick off and on. He was often deathly ill. And they never found out what was wrong. There's a lot of theories about what Charles Darwin was going through at the time. I think he was just so conflicted in his heart that a part of him needed to be sick so he couldn't write the book. Because I've done that to myself. Or I cooked something up, or I allowed my body to take over because I'm so conflicted with something. And so the excuse was, oh, I'm sick, I can't do it. He didn't want to deny the presence of God. His minister, who he was very, very close to, they were good friends, walked away from him and would not continue their friendship because he said, I cannot be friends with you, and this is what you're doing. And that was the cost. That was the cost. But he wrote the book after a long, long time. And I think that he had many, many moments, probably thousands, maybe millions of moments of discrimination about should I do this or not, and listening to other people's thoughts about what he was doing, his own thoughts about what he was doing. He was probably his biggest critic through that whole time writing that book. And finally, he did it. Actually, he wrote it. And back in those days, so this is the 1800s, he's writing this book. And so he's writing by hand. And it was 200-some pages. And he gave it to his wife. They had a very close relationship. And she had a very, very close, intimate relationship with God. And she even was wondering whether or not he should write this book. But he trusted her so much that when he was done writing it, he handed her a couple hundred pages, handwritten pages, and said, you read it and you tell me what you think you should do. If you want to burn it, go burn it. And I thought, oh my gosh, 200 handwritten pages. No copies. No nothing on a hard drive sitting somewhere. So in case she burned it, he could turn around and say, well, I'm going to publish this anyway. That's how much he trusted her. That was a discriminating thought. To trust the person he dearly loved in this world and said, if you think I should publish this book, I will. If you don't, I won't. And he did publish it. And it sold out the first day it was out. And the church did have some problems with it, of course. A lot of people had some problems with it, but a lot of people did not. A lot of people found it fascinating. I remember reading that book a few decades ago. Some point somewhere, we bump up against all the thoughts in our heads and we have to make a decision. Well, actually, we don't have to. You can sit and let it swirl, which I think he did for those many years. And I've done it. I've sat and let thoughts just swirl in my head. Should I or shouldn't I? Should or I shouldn't? And I start to do it, and I say, no, I'm not going to do it. Or I step my toe in something, and no, I can't do that. No, it's probably not going to work. And I got all those stories. And I go back again, I'm back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And sometimes the negative thoughts won. I've said this before to you. I can't tell you the number of things I've walked away from because the negative thoughts won. Or because I was afraid. Or because I didn't have it all figured out. We don't have anything figured out that we haven't tried yet. There's just the doing of it and trusting what we hear in our hearts and knowing where that comes from. And that's why it's important to have this relationship with Spirit so that you know when Spirit is speaking to you. So you know what that feels like, what that sounds like. Our bodies often tell us what's right and what's wrong. I can always tell, even if I don't like the answer, that the answer is right. I can always tell. Because in a moment of clarity, I just have this peace. And then I start fighting with, am I going to do it or not? Thank God my learning curve has gotten much, much shorter these days. I don't bump my head as long as I used to before. But it's a skill. It's a matter of trusting in what you hear in your heart or your gut. Whatever it is you call it, doesn't matter. But as long as you know what that place is, or what that voice is, or what that feeling is that lets you know you're on the right thing, and that everything else doesn't matter. You can have this one yes from Spirit, or this one answer from Spirit, and a million other no's or variations of why not from everything else, and you can turn from that and do this. And there find your peace. And there find your peace. Yeah, I think as I get older, peace is really what I want. And peace for me is clarity. And it doesn't always feel good. It might feel sad, because some decisions are sad decisions. You know, you may have to give something up. You may have to walk away from a relationship or from something that you've been holding dear or something you're just used to. You know that saying, the devil we know? Yeah, that rut. What we keep turning around in the rut in the road, in our path of life. Sometimes we're just so used to that walking away from it is sad. Because you're walking away from a part of yourself that served you for a time. And that's okay to be sad about that. So feel your sadness and then move. And then go towards the yes that Spirit is calling you to. But just because it's sad doesn't mean it isn't right. It just means you're closing a door. It just means you may not know what this is, and maybe you're just afraid of that, and that brings up sadness. That's okay. It's okay. In the midst of the sadness, affirm what you need to affirm. All that God is, I am. And I can cry through that. Lord knows I have, and I do. All that God is, I am. Probably most of the time, I'm affirming it with tears in my eyes, or a lump in my throat, or my heart just kind of bending over. And then move towards your highest and best, and move towards your peace, move towards your joy and your happiness and your prosperity. The good life. Let's take this into meditation. So do you have a dominant thought you're struggling with? A thought that just comes up without you calling it. Something that shows up on a regular basis, no matter what it is you're trying to do. How much chaff do you have in your life that you need to throw out, that you need to burn, because it's getting in the way of the wheat, the goodness? We all have something. What is that thing? That thing is a glass ceiling. And you're bumping your head up against it as you're trying to move forward. As you're being called to expand and evolve into your divinity. There are usually thoughts circulating that get in the way. So I invite you now to search your heart. And what's one thing that you could affirm to yourself that could help you break through that glass ceiling you've constructed, knowingly or unknowingly? Is it an affirmation about the God of your understanding? Is it an affirmation about your capabilities, your divinity, your gifts, your talents? Is it a prayer of thanks? Is it an affirmation about unbounded joy? Vibrant health? Unconditional love? Is it about finding purpose and something fulfilling? Is it an affirmation about just being present here in the moment, each moment? Search your heart. What do you need to say to yourself when life gets too dense? When the world gets too dense? when culture gets too dense, when the naysayers in our lives are too loud, even if you are one of the naysayers. What do you know for sure that you could affirm? And whenever you hear those words or say them in your heart of hearts, you instantly feel peace. Only you know. Only you know. Trust your heart. Trust the process. Trust where you feel God is leading you. Trust that your highest and best is at work in the here and now, even though the picture doesn't look the way you think it should look. Trust. Find those words, and if you don't have them in this moment, trust that they are coming to you. That just because you've asked, the answer is coming forth, and it will come forth in the perfect moment, and you will know them when you hear them in your heart of hearts. Maybe in the next book you read, the next movie you watch, the next comment from a friend or colleague. The next song you sing may have the perfect affirmation for you to bring you back to peace. So let's take a deep breath together. Inhale, and then exhale. If you have that affirmation, say it in your heart of hearts now as you inhale. Allow yourself to feel it and know it and trust it. Exhale. If you don't have that affirmation yet, give thanks for its coming, knowing that it is on its way to you. It is percolating in the atmosphere, in the cosmos, in divine mind. And so it is, and so it shall be.